All right, here we go. Everybody's arriving.
Hello everyone, bonjour à toutes et à tous. C'est avec grand plaisir que je vous accueille à notre webinaire aujourd'hui. I'm very excited to welcome you all to our webinar today for an exciting discussion between Dr. Niemer and members of her inaugural Youth Council about their Vision for the Future of Science report. So hi everyone, my name is Madison Rilling. I'm a medical physicist and an optical scientist by trade, and I am now executive director of Optonic, which is a nonprofit that serves to boost the economic development and innovation capacity of the optics and photonics sector in Quebec and Canada. I had the pleasure of being on the very first and last cohort of the Chief Science Advisors Youth Council, and I'll be moderating the discussion today. So I'd just like to start off by acknowledging that I am joining you from Quebec City, the traditional unceded territory of the Huron-Wendat people. As we are all joining virtually from different places today, I would like to encourage you to all take a moment to learn about and reflect upon the Indigenous people whose lands you are currently on. And in many ways, you'll see that today's discussion is a further opportunity to reflect on how we can collectively support and amplify the voices and efforts of Indigenous scientists and researchers. So I would like to touch down on a few housekeeping points. So I would request that everyone who's joining the call today be muted, so mute your microphones, and also to let you know that the session is being recorded. I want to let you know that there will be Q&As, there will be a Q&A time at the end of the discussion, but if questions come up as we are having the discussion, please drop them in the chat et sentez-vous libre de vous poser vos questions en anglais ou en français. So now I am very excited to introduce you to Canada's own Chief Science Advisor, Dr. Niemer. Dr. Niemer, à vous la parole.
Eh bien, merci beaucoup, Madison, et quel plaisir d'être avec vous tous cet après-midi. J'ai eu l'immense plaisir de travailler avec un groupe extraordinaire de jeunes pleins de talent, et je crois que la discussion aujourd'hui va bien le prouver, à quel point ils ont des choses à dire, et vraiment, ce fut un privilège de travailler avec vous. C'est un immense plaisir d'être peut-être une dernière fois avec vous comme groupe et de discuter surtout de votre rapport sur votre vision de la science. Donc, I'm delighted to be here, and I'm joined by great members of my youth council. They're all great, but we had to choose a few. And I'd like to take a minute to introduce them to you. I'll start with, I don't know, seniority or how you appear on my screen here. So first I have Landon Getz, Dr. Landon Getz, who's now a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Toronto after having received his PhD degree from Dalhousie. And with him as well is Chelsea Johnson. Chelsea is a public health expert and works in health emergency management. So you can imagine that she was very valuable in the past years and in the years to come as well. And then last but not least is Max King, an aerospace engineer. Now, the fact that I'm introducing him last, please don't assume that we don't love engineers. Engineering is applied science after all. So here you have it, all these wonderful members of my youth council, and I very much look forward to the conversation today.
Merci beaucoup, Mona. Donc, I'd like to actually turn the first question to you, Dr. Niemer. So why exactly did you ask your youth council to prepare this Vision for Science report?
Well, it was extremely important to hear from the youth themselves about how they envision their future. And the past several years have shown us that the future is going to have more, not less, science in it. And countries around the world are racing to solidify and further improve their science and technology landscape. So I thought that by asking the Youth Council to provide their vision, that this very important document would be here to be acknowledged and used as the country develops its own strategic vision for the future.
Thank you so much, Dr. Niemer. And I have to say it was a very important anchoring point or anchoring project for the whole Youth Council that really brought us together and led us to having a lot of different reflections on so many different dimensions that make up the science landscape in Canada. So now I'd like to turn over to Landon actually to kick things off and to maybe highlight what were some of the main highlights or some key recommendations that you would like to talk about that are in the report?
Sure. I'll just quickly re-up what you said, Madison, about the sort of importance of this as a grounding piece. I really think the report brought us together. I'm very proud of the work that we were able to do, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I really think it was a great anchoring point for us and hopefully created lifelong friends during the process, I think. All right, so the report itself is sort of bookmarked between, of course, a conclusion and an introduction, but the main chapters of the report include directions for science and research in Canada, science should be collaborative and multidisciplinary, pathways to science, science and society, and the next generation of science advice. And sort of within those individual chapters, we really tried to focus justice and belonging and equity, diversity, and inclusion to sort of spread out throughout the report to really sort of highlight how important that is in the sort of everyday work that we do. And I think that comes to focus most in one of the examples I'm going to talk about, which is in the Pathways to Science section of the report, about redefining research excellence. I think this is the part of the report that I sort of feel very strongly about, mostly in the sense that I think in order for us to continue to succeed in Canadian science, we really have to look at how we decide what is research excellence. And so we talk about this a decent amount in the report related to grad students and the academic success surrounding how students are evaluated for scholarships and fellowships. Speaking of EDI, I think we asked ourselves questions like, is the way that we think about research excellence actually supportive of equity, diversity, and inclusion, or does it favor certain groups? I think that we know that underprivileged groups are really not adequately represented in awards currently. We thought that sort of one way that we might support research excellence in a different direction and perhaps advance EDI goals in fellowships would be to ensure that community engagement and teaching excellence are sort of weighted very heavily in the decisions that we're making regarding research excellence and sort of recognizing, of course, that this is not the only solution to that problem. The sort of other thing that I'll highlight before I'll pass it over to Max to talk about a little bit about what his main highlights were. Is that our last section of the report focuses on the next generation of science advice. And I also think this is an important section because we really want this Youth Council with the Chief Science Advisor's Office to be a mark of success for youth councils across governmental institutions and academic ones. I think we can sort of spread youth councils to other areas in order to try and sort of bolster youth engagement and opinion within all levels of government and institutions. I think what's most important is that youth are often very imaginative and are often unburdened by dogma. And I think this can be really important when we're looking at trying to challenge the status quo and ensuring that our priorities are going in a way that, as Mona mentioned, will affect the future that youth will then have to live in. So from there, maybe I'll pass it over to Max to talk about what his highlights were from the report.
Thanks, Landon. Yeah, excellent, excellent overview. For the portion of the report that I worked on most and spoke most to me was section 3 that's listed here. That was science focusing on being collaborative and multidisciplinary. As Dr. Niemer pointed out in the intro, I'm an engineer by training, so I'm the least qualified person to be giving science advice. And so that's what part of this youth council's focus is about, though. It's about bringing in voices that are not necessarily already at the table, or how do we approach problems in the coming century differently than we've approached problems in the past. We've only been doing organized science, government-funded science, for about 100 years as a society. You know, we've been making movies longer than that. So there's a lot of ways we haven't figured out how to solve every problem. And in the space sector that I work in every day, we are always encountering new problems. Every problem we face here on Earth, we will be encountering in space as we bring humans out into outer space. And those problems extend to food, healthcare, how to make a spaceship work. And these are all problems that we will face on Earth in due time. And we need to bring in the right people to solve the right problems when we need them. I think we won't harp on the last several years too much, but I think the events of the last several years did show us that the problems that we will encounter moving forward in science and society are much different and much more interconnected than the ones we have faced for the last 100 years or so.
Thank you so much, Max and Landon, for that overview of the different recommendations, the different highlights that spoke to you. And just bouncing off of Max's intervention, talking about how science should be collaborative, I think it would be interesting also to highlight that this document was not one that was a standalone effort, let's say, from the Youth Council itself. There were stakeholder engagement sessions that went into the different recommendations and like policy pieces that were integrated there. And there's so a lot of these different points we realized or got to dive into with a lot of different organizations who are having these same reflections. So being able to come together with different stakeholders within the science community was really a great part of elaborating this report. Now I'd want to actually turn to Chelsea and ask you, what, with everything that we put forward in this report, what would you, if you could, let's say, if you can make one immediate change to the science system in Canada or the science culture that we have in Canada, broadly speaking, what would it be for you, Chelsea?
Thank you, Manson. I'm going to cheat a little and I'm going to go a little vague and explain what I mean here. I think what I'd want to do is just to really see things shaked up. So not just like shaking the table, but maybe actually destroying the table and stop thinking about the concept of tables. I know Landon mentioned redefining excellence, and that's something that I also feel very, very strongly about. So oftentimes we think about research excellence and excellence in science, and we look at things as GPAs, how many papers have been published, who you know, and if you have the right name or title. But we know there's a lot of knowledge that exists in our communities and exists within relationships that really doesn't get identified as excellence. So when we start to be a little more critical of what we mean by excellence in this field, I think we're going to see a lot of these positive results come out. And I feel like I have to mention it because I'm currently at an emergency management conference, and someone mentioned the need to redefine what resilience looks like in communities. And we can't be the ones to just say, this is now the new definition we're going forward with. We really need to be connected with the communities and say, what does excellence look like for you? What do you want to see? How can we as a society, as a field, support you so that you can raise up and that we can see the excellence that's being done? When we also think about in the last couple of years, what I'd like to see when we shake up a system is breaking down these silos, and not just within science, but across all fields. Again, as someone that straddles both science and emergency management, there's a natural pairing there that I think exists, but we don't always see that, especially in the current structures that exist. So that's something that I'd really like to see, is that, yes, we all have are part of this body of knowledge, but we're part of a community within Canada. So how can we break down those silos to actually be very collaborative? And you know, that goes forward to just being able to amplify the work that's already being done in our communities. So I know that's kind of, I feel like that's a little bit cheating, but that's what I'd like to see happen immediately.
Thank you for sharing, Chelsea. Landon, I'd ask you the same question. What would you want to see shaken up in the science system or science culture in Canada?
I feel like my answer is also cheating. I wanted to mention, I think sort of my change is that we've been hearing an awful lot about scholarships and fellowships in Canada and how little the values of those things are for grad students. And acknowledging fully that I'm embedded in the academic system, so this is really often what I'm thinking about. But a lot of the work that happens in the academic system is being done by grad students and by postdocs. And so because of that, a lot of the innovation, a lot of the work that's being done is being driven by these people, and they're woefully underpaid at the tri-agency level currently. And so I think if I was thinking about one change that I think would have a really large impact, I think recognizing that the current cost of living is not supportive from these tri-agency scholarships, and the fact that there's really not enough of them to go around currently means that we're likely losing very talented grad students and postdocs to other places where they can get the funding that they need to survive. And so I think looking at sort of the larger picture for academic science anyways, I really think it's going to be very important to increase the funding there. And that's sort of what I think would make the most fundamental change to our lives in science at the moment.
Thank you, Landon. And it does reflect a lot of actually, let's say, movement or momentum that's been happening within the student community across Canada on that exact point. And Max, I want to ask you the same question as well. So what is a key, like one immediate change that you would want to make to the science system or science culture?
Great question. For me, it comes down to that research excellence point that Landon mentioned earlier. And that goes for just that redefining excellence that extends to not only researchers and academia, but also students. I sort of point to myself. I was a student not too long ago. And that's something, we're not just throwing stones one way. We're also thinking about how do we define excellence at a student level, and especially for comparing things like design work and education that is very hands-on. And how do we make sure that students at universities or colleges where that experience isn't as hands-on or is removed from maybe having all the bells and whistles that some fancier schools have, how can we make sure that we still acknowledge the excellence that those students are contributing and not just what their academic surroundings are providing them? So lots of things to change, but if I had to pick one, that'd be high on the list.
Thank you so much for sharing, Max. Et Dr. Nemmer, peut-être j'aimerais vous donner l'opportunité de réagir aux différents points que vous avez entendus dans les éléments à changer ou à améliorer dans le système de sciences au Canada. Qu'est-ce qui ressort dans ce que vous entendez de la relève?
Écoutez, je suis enchantée d'entendre chacun d'entre vous finalement vouloir changer le monde à travers changer des éléments particuliers qui vont avoir un effet domino, n'est-ce pas, sur tout le système. So, the whole idea of giving the Youth Council a chance to make their voices heard was precisely that. And I can't remember, Max mentioned that we've been doing a publicly funded research for 100 years. Yes, but in Canada, I would say our research intensity is even younger than this. It's only, I would say, the past 3 decades. So, if you're a baby, then you're an adolescent, then you're a young adult. Keeping the same principles and everything, you do change things, right? You adapt to how things are around you, and I think our system is in need for adaptation, modernization. It's a system that served us well, but doesn't mean that it should remain the same for the years to come. So the definition of excellence, the more inclusive definition of excellence, is something that is not even theoretical. We've lived it. We've seen how important it is to have the many different voices and individuals contribute, and that each contribution is so valuable and important by itself. So we can't be all the same, and then we'll have so many gaps. I think this is something that we need to take a good look at. The scholarships issue is one that speaks to me a lot, as you all know. And I've been reflecting a lot on this, and through my own work, I realize that things that are evident to some of us are not evident to all of us. So, for example, when we talk about, what scholarships are for, like we understand that these are apprenticeship, that this is to support people who are learning their job while working with the experts or the masters, whichever way you want to call it. But to others, scholarships conjures the vision of elitism, which is of course very far from it. So I think it's, and I say this, to everyone, we have to appreciate that we still have a lot of education and a lot of awareness that we need to do in the country, with our neighbors, with the public in general, with our elected officials, so that it's really understood that if we don't reform the system or modernize the system that we have, we're going to perpetuate the inequalities, the biases, and the exclusion for some communities that our present system has resulted in. But I think it requires continuous engagement and continuous dialogue, so that people understand what we're talking about and don't think it's completely the opposite of actually what we're trying to do.
Thank you so much for all those comments, Mona. It's really appreciated. And speaking of continued dialogue, people joining us today may not know that we are actually finishing our mandate. So the current cohort of the Youth Council has been in place since March 2020, a date that many may remember. So March 2020 until very recently, and so a 3-year mandate, and a new Youth Council, a new cohort will be coming in very, very soon. So maybe I'd start with Max on this one. And based on your experience, based on the work we did, what do you think that the incoming Youth Council has to look forward to?
I would say the chief thing for me that I would pass on, they have to look forward to, is the depth of connections to people within science and within the office of the Chief Science Advisor especially. What was most encouraging for me entering was seeing the genuine passion and interest there is in the Canadian government for engaging youth, that this is not just a surface level approach, that there is an interest in not only hearing us, not only giving us platform for our voices, but also sitting with us and thinking deeply and genuinely about how can we integrate the advice. And so the support that went in behind the scenes to the report that came out with the vision of science that has our names and our faces on it as the Youth Council, there is an extraordinary depth of support from the office behind that. And that is something that I think the incoming Youth Council should especially look forward to having.
Thank you so much, Max, for that. Those are great points. I'll turn it over to Chelsea. What do you wish for the incoming cohort, or what do you think that they have to look forward to the most?
I think Max did a really good job of really highlighting that piece of the value that you get from joining being on the council. And there's just so much that you learn and so much that you're able to give. And one thing that I noticed is that now people are more aware that, the youth and people on the Youth Council have a voice and there's great value added. And we know that the incoming cohort is very unique, very special and impressive. So I'm sure they're going to come up with really great things to do. Reading over their bios they're just such a great group of people. I'm really excited to see what they have to do over their mandate. If I'm thinking about what they can do now with this handoff process, now that we've created this report, one thing that really stands out to me from the report is this piece about the public trust. I know we framed that right at the beginning of our report. The pandemic really highlighted a lot of issues with lack of trust in science or scientific institutions, and we really did get to the heart of it, saying that it's not really that folks aren't trusting scientific topics or principles. In some cases it is, but in many cases it's lack of trust or buy-in to scientists, practitioners, policies, and politics. So folks aren't necessarily anti-science, but there's a lack of trust in these institutions. So I think that'd be a really interesting place for the new cohort to kind of jump off of. That's a really good starting point. And again, now that we're in a less acute phase of the pandemic, there are a lot of opportunities to really connect with the communities and looking at the expertise that the Youth Council has and really looking within Canada and internationally how we can start to appropriately address those concerns.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. How about you, Landon? What do you think that the next cohort has to look forward to the most?
Sure. I think Max and Chelsea have stolen most of my points, but what I think I will just re-up is that working with Dr. Nima's office and working with the rest of the Youth Council was an absolutely incredible experience. I didn't know that I really understood that much about science policy coming into it. I had a rough idea, but I think I definitely learned a lot and definitely have a much better understanding of how things are sort of done now in the science policy world and how decisions are made and how advice works. What I think I will say is that what some of the audience might not recognize is that we actually started our mandate as the first Youth Council, I think a week before lockdown started, or it was like the same week as we had been shut down for COVID. And so between that and being the very first Youth Council in the office, I think we've had our fair share of working out kinks and figuring out how to work together, especially largely remotely. So I think the incoming Youth Council will have a easier time getting their wheels on the ground and moving forward. And I really hope that our report can serve as some more traction for those wheels to really just sort of propel themselves forward. I hope that they have an opportunity to create their own voice, take what we have, agree, disagree, build their own vision for the future as well. But really hope that they'll be able to use the report that we've written as some groundwork to get them started.
Great, thank you so much, Landon. And I just want to say before handing it over to Dr. Nima, please drop your questions in the chat. We're going to be going into a Q&A session. So if you have any questions, any comments that you want us or the members or Dr. Nima to react to, please share them with us. And so actually, Dr. Nima, I want to ask you this question as well. Very soon, you will be welcoming a very new cohort, all new faces coming from coast to coast to coast. What do you think that the incoming Youth Council has to look forward to the most?
Well, let me first say how excited I am to meet them. And I hope that Landon's prediction that they will have an easier time and no emergency in the country will bear fruit, because I think that many of us just can't handle another emergency. Seriously, it's a group that's very engaged, judging on my very brief conversation with each one of them and what they've also put down that they want to do. I would say that I hope that they continue to challenge me and challenge the system constructively. You know, with respect to your report, I mean, they're not bound by it, but I, sure hope that they're not going to reject it. That would be highly unlikely because of all the engagement that you guys have done. I think that there are some areas in the report that they can build on, and they have, of course, their own views. As I told you, it's I don't want to tell you what to do. I'll call upon some of them as we do some of our own work in the office, but I hope that they will decide among themselves what to work on. You all have mentioned the importance of public trust. I think disinformation, misinformation is a reality that we need to deal with as a society. For the sake of our society, not just for the sake of science. And it's critical that the youth really pave the way. They're the ones who can influence their peers and even the older generation. So I would hope that perhaps they may look into this area. I think that in Canada, we have still a lot of challenges in terms of increasing science literacy, and we've talked about this many times, and you've mentioned it in your report as well. I don't think that anybody should shy from making some concrete suggestions in terms of how we start at schools, what we can change, building on already the very concrete things that you have put forward. But I find that these are challenges for the country ahead, and we absolutely need to deal with them in a sort of holistic manner. And the youth voices are incredibly important in this process.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rona. It's very exciting to think about the new cohort coming in, and just the importance that you give to their voice in the work that you do. And we could really feel that in all the work that we did as well.
And you guys are going to be the mentors, so you'll have a chance as well to interact with them.
Yeah, we're very, very excited to get to meet all of them. And actually, I have a little closing remark on that, but it's coming up very soon. And maybe, so I'll just read out actually a comment that we got in the chat, and please feel free, anyone who wants to react to this. So we got a comment from Scott, which is that there has been a fair amount of discussion about what in the 21st century excellence should encompass generally, and specifically how it should be evaluated. But the phrase at issue here is research excellence. Perhaps we should be asking ourselves, what is a characterization of research that is fit for purpose? Is there one of our panelists who would want to react to this? I'm thinking maybe Landon, because or I saw Max just turned off.
I was going to say Landon. I was going to put Landon on the spot.
Everybody's throwing me under the bus, are we?
Yeah.
It's a tricky question because I think there's a lot of pieces in it that to speak to, because I think there's a question about research excellence and what being a researcher means and what being an excellent researcher means. And I think historically we've spent a lot of time thinking about, excellent researchers as having lots of publications, having lots of citations, having lots of grants. In terms of students, we think about GPA, we think about grades and maybe publications as well. But I wonder if, if we broaden out the idea of what being a researcher is and don't just look specifically at the research that people are doing, but look more broadly at sort of who they are in these spaces, who the leaders are, who the people who are really doing excellent work, both in and outside of research. I think we can expand that out a little bit to some of the stuff that maybe Chelsea had suggested, which was, the community engagement pieces, because I think we're going to need researchers in the future who have access to the research world, but also can communicate that to communities and have trust within those communities. And I think, even teaching excellence, we're going to need researchers who are able to communicate well their research to students and build good educational curriculum. I think, what was the other thing that we suggested? I don't want to talk too much about it, but I guess I mentioned that with community engagement and teaching excellence, those were kind of the ideas that we came up with. But I think, I think we can think about other aspects of EDI's representation in general, having Black researchers, having queer researchers represented as a form of excellence, in the sense that people can sort of see themselves represented and feel like research is for them. So I don't know, I digress a little bit, but I think if I'm thinking about research excellence, I think about the question of what it means to be a researcher. And I think that's a broader question than we've often spent a lot of time thinking about.
Great, thank you so much for that response, Landon. William actually just asked us a question, and he says that science departments at many universities operate like independent franchises with no real incentive to collaborate across departments. What advice would you give to university administrators on how and why to break down the research/departmental silos to enable more collaborative and multidisciplinary research? Maybe I would start with Max and then pass it over to Dr. Niemer.
Great question, William. I will take this moment, direct everyone to chapter 3 of the report, focusing on collaboration and interdisciplinary work. And you've hit on an excellent point. It's not a matter of necessarily people don't want to engage in collaborative and interdisciplinary research, but it's encouraging them to be able to do so. And so some barriers that they face are, very strict funding allocations that will require specific publications or specific grants or specific requirements that can only be met within a certain field. And so we need to make perhaps portion out some of our funding mechanisms that already exist to encourage collaborative research or research that may not necessarily have an immediate, I don't want to say end goal, that's not the right phrase, but an outcome that might be further reaching and further down the road than just one notch over on the periodic table, or so needing to create more incentives at a government level to encourage that type of research. This is not something that we simply are telling researchers, hey, open up your eyes. People want to engage in this work, and there are some suggestions in our report for mechanisms to do that. I agree. I'd like to hear Dr. Niemer's perspective on this as well.
Well, this is a question that's very close to my heart, but I can get passionate about it, so please interrupt me. Look, someone once said, or I read somewhere, that there are 3 institutions that haven't changed much over the years: the British monarchy, the Catholic Church, and the universities. So I think that tells us something. Universities are great institutions. They were started in a certain way at a certain time when knowledge was partitioned into different spheres and spaces, and then everything sort of followed. And it's exactly what you've put your point on, Max, and all of you in your report. It's the funding system does not encourage departments to come together to change. I mean, there are more impediments than incentives and facilitators and enablers of multidisciplinarity, although everyone in university would tell you this is a priority for them. But you scratch this and you start getting into the practical aspect, and then things start going complicated and so on. But let me just give one example. We used to teach medicine through anatomy, separate from physiology, separate from pathology, separate from, they were discipline based. And then in the 1970s, McMaster University created this approach of basically teaching medicine through diseases or through cases. And some of us, me included, was sort of horrified at the beginning. It's like, I'm going to be treated by a doctor who's never taken an anatomy course, who wouldn't know, where the organs are. Well, guess what? Many universities have embraced this approach, and we have excellent physicians and surgeons, and they didn't have to learn anatomy and physiology and pharmacology separately, but they had to learn about neurologic diseases or cardiac diseases, etc. And I would just love to see the day when we're teaching science in our great institutions with on a problem-based approach, and there would be just so many. We can learn chemistry through learning about climate change. We can learn physics through learning about sustainable infrastructure. I mean, you name it. So, start there and then go out from it. And I think that it will force everyone, physics, chemistry, biology department, whatever, to just work together, first of all, to create the modules, then to deliver them, evaluate the students. And I think that, I bet you anything you want, that the students would love it. It's a lot more exciting than learning, the way we're teaching science now in siloed. And we're seeing a lot of actually dropout from undergraduate science programs because of the dryness of these initial courses. But I'm going to stop here because this is public, and I think that I'm going to lose a lot of friends in universities after saying what I just said.
Merci pour avoir partagé ton grain de sel et ton expérience et expertise là, dans le milieu de toute l'administration de la recherche, Dr. Niemer. C'est très apprécié. I'd like to turn over to Chelsea for the next question, and it's how is the voice of the Youth Council heard by the Canadian society at large? And as example, how is the report communicated and advanced within the Canadian science community?
Thanks, Madison. This is a great question, and questions like these keep me up at night because we all do a lot of work. We put in a lot of work into the stuff that we produce, but how is it being received? Are the community actually tapping into it? Is it being picked up? What I like to think about it, especially at my time on the council, is that we serve as a conduit between the community and policymakers. So I think not only are we trying to share the big science with the community, but we're also trying to share the concerns of scientists in the community and the community at large to the policymakers as well. And when we think about the report and how that's been communicated, we know that there are folks that are already very well intertwined into the science community are going to be able to easily tap into that. And the folks that were in that cohort, we have our own communities that we connect with. So I know a lot of folks are able to go into their communities and bring that knowledge there to share and have discussions. We do a lot of different presentations. So we definitely do try to get it into the community. But I think this is one of those pieces that's going to always kind of exist and something that we always need to work on, and a piece that I think the incoming cohort will also be able to pick up. And I'll say we did great work with the report, but how can we make sure that the findings that we have are communicated appropriately and that it doesn't just end there, that it just starts a dialogue and that we're actually going to see change. So Alan, I think that's a great question. I don't know if I can answer it definitively and how it's been received, but I know in the communities that we're connected to, that we do try to not only bring the report there, but open that discussion and bring that back to the office.
Thank you so much, Chelsea, for bringing that community perspective and community engagement piece to front and center, because it was something that we often thought about, and there's still so much more to address. But yeah, very, very great points. You know, just time for one last question before I close things up. And this question I'd like to direct over to Landon. So it's from Sarah Kim, who has a question about the future of STEM. And in the report, we made suggestions towards STEM in terms of its growing interdisciplinarity. In terms of STEM research and funding, it too tends to function in a silo, which has given rise to the acronym STEAM, so STEAM. How do you see the STEM field evolving as it gains traction with other fields and other ways of knowing? What would you like to see?
Sure. I think I wanted to reflect, it's an excellent question. I think the first thing I wanted to reflect on is your point about STEM acting in a silo. I think it's actually even worse than that. I think that like even the individual acronyms within STEM often act in a silo. Coming from the science world, I often find it incredibly difficult to interact with engineers. Sorry, Max. Not necessarily because they're bad colleagues or anything like that. It's just that they have different sort of dogma or whatever the case may be. So the silos actually, I think, are maybe even worse than just STEM alone. But I think to get to your question, you know, it's always been my dream as somebody who's spent some time studying ethics and responding to ethical questions in science, that we would have people, you know, philosophers, ethicists, whatever, within science departments. I'm in the Department of Biochemistry here at the University of Toronto. It would be absolutely lovely to have like a philosopher in residence or an ethicist in residence, because I think the reality is, and I think this speaks to another question I saw in the chat, is that a lot of the ends that we think about when we think about what we want to create within, you know, STEM fields are things like maybe artificial intelligence as a technology, or we want to build self-driving cars, or whatever the case may be. And these technologies often have raise very significant philosophical questions, very significant ethical questions, and yet we often develop these technologies without engaging in those questions at all. We just develop them. And so what we're seeing is that AI, ChatGPT, et cetera, are being created. They're in the world, they exist. And yet we have all these questions about whether or not we should be using them, whether or not it's safe to use them, what the responses is that it gives, these kinds of sort of much larger questions about the technology. So I think if we think about the future that I'd like to see, at least in terms of STEM, I think integrating and we can say STEAM in terms of arts, we can say humanities, whatever the case may be. I think integrating much broader fields is going to be really important. How exactly we're going to do that, I have no idea. How exactly we want to do that, I have no idea. But I think it's going to be an absolutely essential point to building safe technologies in the future.
Great. Thank you so much, Landon. And actually, we just have one last question, so we'll get to it quickly before closing things up. So we have a question from Rena, which is who's asking us, what are some initiatives being done or implemented to diversify how we characterize research excellence? So outside of grants, publications, the typical criteria, et cetera. This could be a governmental level or institutional level, for example. Maybe Dr. Niemer, would you like to take this one, like with all the different partners, institutions, even departments that you're working with who are thinking about this, I'm sure, what is happening on this front?
This is an extremely important question, and maybe I'll just go back to defining research excellence. For me, it's about impact, and doesn't mean impact on climate change or impact on health. It means impact. Could be impact on the community, could be impact on training, could be impact on the public if you've done science communications, on enhancing science literacy. So I think that a lot of groups, and that's I'm certainly encourage this to happen, to have a dialogue between the for example, the funding agencies, the universities, and the other research bodies, because like everybody needs to work from the same definition, right? Because at the end, everything feeds on each other. And I can say I am optimistic because there's definitely movement to recognize things that are outside of writing papers, activities in the community as being fundamentally important. So I would say that the memory from the pandemic, I think, has been helpful, but that can fade away very quickly. So if I have a word of wisdom to give to everyone here is, don't assume that because it's starting to happen that it will continue to happen. And change takes time, and the sort of human reaction of going back to your comfort zone is extremely great. So I would say that we need to work to continue to highlight the importance of all these different contributions, whether it's to the advancement of a field, to the advancement of a solution, to a problem, etc. And that we're not where we need to be, but I think that there are a large number of people who share at least this vision. So there are many partners to work with on this. So I'm optimistic for the future, but the future is going to need your voices more than ever.
Merci beaucoup, Dr. Niemer. Thank you so much. I want to thank Max, Chelsea, Landon, and a big shout out to all members of the first cohort of the Youth Council for contributing to the report, to making this whole experience and really this legacy document in a way possible. And I want to take the opportunity to thank Dr. Niemer on behalf of the first cohort. When Dr. Niemer was first named Canada's Chief Science Advisor, the Prime Minister talked about the creation of this new position, giving a voice to scientists across Canada. And we are extremely, extremely thankful that you leveraged this opportunity, this platform, and used it to give the youth, the next generation of scientists in Canada, a voice as well, and really propelled it forward in so many different ways. So I want to thank you, your office, your whole team in really making that possible, because it was such a privilege for all of us to be able to contribute to the work you do and contribute to imagining how science can be different and just better in Canada and for everyone. So thank you so much for that. And obviously, I want to thank all of our audience today. Thank you for joining in on the conversation, for listening, for contributing your questions and comments. C'est un plaisir de vous avoir aujourd'hui. And the big announcement is that it is tomorrow that the next cohort will be announced. So please stay tuned on, actually follow on Twitter, ChiefsICAN, so that you can discover all the new faces and obviously like the great people who will be contributing to amplifying and bringing forward the youth voice in these science discussions at this very high level. So thank you again to everyone. Thank you to you, Dr. Niemer.
Can I say something, Madison?
For sure, I will definitely, with pleasure, give you the last word.
Well, thank you. Premièrement, merci beaucoup. Vraiment, quel beau tour de main que tu as eu pour ce panel. If everything else fails, you know, you can be, I think, a great moderator for very important events and programs. But I just wanted to say what a pleasure it was for me to work with you, but above all, to really see you develop and grow. It's like, you know, one's own children. Many of you have graduated during this time. Some of you have changed jobs. And I've just couldn't be more proud of everything that you have achieved, in addition to what you've achieved as part of this Youth Council. And it's given me just so much faith in the future of the country. So I just want to say that I really hope that we stay in touch. You're like my children now. And I wish you the very best. Know how proud I am of your accomplishments. And I'm sure that it's going to be the same for the next generation. They have big shoes to fill. Some of them may be on this call, and I think they can appreciate the level of excellence that they are following. So let's all stay in touch and continue the good work.
Thank you so much. We look forward to working with the new cohort, and congratulations to all of the new members who I think a few are here today. Donc, merci à tout le monde. Thank you to everyone, and have a nice day.
Au plaisir. Au revoir.
Thank you all very much.
Take care.
Hi, Kara. Thank you for your back-end support. Merci.